Intimacy's never really been safe. I'm going to lose my identity. I'm going to be smothered. I'm going to be trapped. You can't change your partner. The only thing that you can really do is actually change yourself and inspire them to step up. And so that drive to succeed, to achieve, to build wealth is really coming from a wounded energy. Some of the healthiest relationships that I have seen are where the woman is fully in her power and in her flow. Love and success are compatible. They're not mutually exclusive.
Welcome to Inspired by Success. I'm your host, Linda Vo, and today we're exploring how mastering the science of love could be your ultimate career hack. Our guest is an entrepreneur who's redefining relationships for the digital age. Her journey from anxious attachment to relationship guru is pretty mind-blowing. Get ready to challenge everything you thought you knew about balancing ambition and intimacy. We'll uncover the hidden links between your personal connections and career breakthroughs. Whether you're seeking deeper connections or struggling to balance love and ambition, this episode promises insights that could change your approach to both relationships and success. Ready to revolutionize your relationships and reach new heights? Let's dive in with Katarina Polonska. Welcome to the show.
Hey, good to be here. Sorry, good to have you. Good to be here.
No worries. Tell me, your journey, you called yourself a recovering anxiously attached person. Can you share a moment when you realized that this attachment style was holding you back in relationships? Because for those of you who aren't familiar with the different attachment styles, can you explain that too? Because I've read a book called, I think it was The Attachment. There was a book about attached. Yeah, attached. That's okay. Right. And it talks about the different attachment styles as well. The anxiously attached, the secure, and the avoidant. So
yeah, secure, anxious, yeah, fearful, avoidant, dismissive, avoidant. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So can you elaborate a little bit on that? And then, share us that moment when you realized that this attachment style was actually what was holding you back, and give us a little bit, some background information for those who want to know what you do.
Okay. A lot of stuff there. All right. Well, maybe I'll start with a quick intro to who I am, and then I'll dive into what attachment theory is and then how I discovered it. So my name is Katarina. I'm a high performance relationship coach, and I actually specialize in integrated attachment theory. So attachment styles are my jam. I help entrepreneurs and executives transform their love lives, transform their relationships, and ultimately become securely attached. So I don't really talk about that because a lot of people don't know what attachment style is. But really, that's kind of like the end goal, right? So I work with a lot of people who are already married or in long-term relationships, and they're finding that it's not going the way that they would like it to go. Maybe their career is going really well. Maybe their business is actually soaring. But when it comes to their love life, they feel pretty disappointed, right? And maybe they're just avoiding it. Maybe they are burying themselves in work. Maybe they actually love their work so much, but when they come home, it's kind of like, they feel flat because they come home, the partner's grumpy. They're trying to avoid a conflict. The partner doesn't really get it. They haven't done anything, like they're having to cook the dinner for the kids. And it's when you feel very disconnected at home. So I help with that kind of situation. I also help singles who maybe are divorced or maybe have walked away from a long-term relationship, and help them actually optimize and find healthy love this time around. And all of that is really encompassed through my methodology, the Successful in Love method, which is rooted in the behavioral science of attraction, which is really about looking at what are the subconscious patterns inside of you that are leading to attract unhealthy love. What do you need to be attracting instead to be happy long-term? And how do you go about doing that? So that's the behavioral science of attraction, and attachment theory is really woven throughout a lot of that. And so what is attachment theory? Attachment theory is really looking at how do you attach, how do you connect to people. And so what we know from science is that, I'm going to try and keep this really brief and simple. As you are growing up between the ages of 0 and 8, or kind of up to the age of 14 or so, I mean, really till 23, but 0 to 8, you're most malleable, then you're still malleable, and then your brain is beginning to fully function. As you are growing up and your brain is developing, it's kind of like a little sponge. It's not fully formed. You don't have the full brainwave capacity, and you're actually like a little sponge, very susceptible, and you're taking in everything around you and making it about you. Children have this very natural egocentrism, which is actually how they learn to process and make sense of the world. It's kind of how you learn. And so in that time frame, everything that you are experiencing around you, you are essentially making it about yourself, and you are drawing conclusions and building your worldview around that. It's kind of, you're building that blueprint of how you operate in the world. And so because you're a little child, because you don't have the intellectual capacity, the discernment to look at things and think to yourself, yeah, I actually don't want that. And actually, this person's not very healthy. I'm going to move away from them. You just take in everything around you. So if your parent comes home one day, and maybe they do this multiple times, right? And they're frustrated at work and they hate their boss and they're tired because they're working long hours, and they come home and they slam their bag down. They don't look at you. You know, their pots and pans are clanging around in the kitchen. They're slamming their fridge door. As a little child, a couple of things are going to happen in that moment. You're potentially going to look at that and think, they're neglecting me. They're ignoring me. They don't want to talk to me. Maybe it's because I've done something. Maybe it's because I'm bad. And already, if this happens on multiple times, and there's a lot of emotion behind it, because it's probably quite a scary experience as a kid to see your parent be angry and frustrated, the conclusions as a little child that you're going to draw about yourself are going to be along the lines of, maybe I'm bad, maybe I'm defective, maybe I'm alone, maybe I'm unseen, maybe I'm unheard, maybe I'm misunderstood. These kind of big beliefs that we form about ourselves. And so these beliefs become part of our worldview. Again, as a child, you don't really know that they're there. You don't question them. And typically, most people grow up in life and they never question them because they don't know they're even there. They're buried deep into the subconscious. However, your subconscious is between 95 and 97% of your brain. So actually, your subconscious is really dictating how you run your reality, right? How you see the world, how you operate, how you behave. And so these deep-seated belief systems, this kind of conditioning, this blueprint is inside of you. You don't know whether it's there. And you're walking around as an adult, living your life, unaware that deep down, buried inside of you, you have a belief that I am bad. And so because of that, you're going to start behaving in ways, because subconsciously your brain will always be creating externally what it believes internally. Your brain needs congruence. You're going to start behaving in ways that's going to potentially reinforce that belief, right? So if I believe that I am bad, for example, I might then, I don't know, I might hide myself from people because actually I don't want to be seen by them. You know, maybe I have a wound of being seen. So I might kind of skulk off into the background in the playground, or as an adult at work, I might not really be out there with the colleagues talking at lunch or at drinks. I might be hiding in the corner of the pub or whatever it might be. And so then people obviously will ignore me because I'm tucked away in the corner and I'm not really being seen. I'm not really making myself present. And therefore people aren't talking to me. And because they're not talking to me because I'm actually hiding, I then get this reinforcement of, well, they're not talking to me because, yeah, like I'm unseen and maybe I'm just like bad. Maybe I'm just like a bad employee, right? Or maybe I stopped trying so hard at work because, again, I have this unconscious belief that I'm bad. And so because I believe it deep down internally without even being aware of it, I'm not going to try as hard as I could at work. And so I'm actually not going to get the results that I need to get at work. And lo and behold, I'm reconfirming externally that internal belief. And so with attachment theory, there's really 4 different attachment styles. And the attachment style is just a really helpful framework to kind of lump together the different belief systems and the different behaviors that we as adults develop in relation to how we kind of essentially the conditioning that we get as children. And so you have secure attachment, which is when your parents are borderline perfect and they know how to handle you. You know, they know how to tend to your needs. They know how to communicate with you. They know how to love you, give you space. And really you blossom as this very healthy, securely attached child who doesn't really have any negative beliefs about yourself. You feel pretty good, you feel pretty safe, you feel pretty loved, you feel accepted, you have all the good things, and lo and behold, your life pans out pretty great. Then you have the 3 other, what we call insecure attachment styles, very common, especially if you are single, kind of post 25, then you can bet that you probably have a bit of insecure attachment inside of you. No shame in that, a lot of us do. And what we have is we have the anxious attachment, which is what I used to be. And that's when your parents are a little bit avoidant or a little bit neglectful or absent. For me, my parents are lovely, wonderful parents. However, they both had PhDs. I'm from an immigrant family, and they were both hustling like lunatics trying to make money. And so ultimately, my father was traveling for most of my life. My mum was working. We had a nanny. They were absent. That doesn't mean that they don't love me. It just meant that they were absent. And the little conclusions that I drew in my little childlike brain were, I'm abandoned. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe they don't love me. And that in turn led to a lot of anxiety in my life because I was really deprived of that validation, that kind of security growing up. And so for so much of my life, I had this really strong feeling that I'm not good enough. and I was anxious and I was constantly looking for love and like clinging to love, right? And so someone would give me attention. I'm like, oh, okay, maybe that's my future boyfriend. Maybe that's my husband. Maybe he's the one. And I was always like looking and seeking and looking and seeking. And of course, that's not the healthiest thing. And actually what would happen then, I'm going a little bit kind of deeper here, is that because I'd be so needy, because I'd be so anxious, because I desperately crave love so much, that I would actually end up being so much that I would actually push away people, right? Men who would find me a little bit overwhelming, a little bit too anxious, and then they would pull away. And that would reinforce my belief that I'm going to be abandoned, that there's something wrong with me, that I'm bad. So you see how this pans out, right? Then you have the two other attachment styles. You have the dismissive avoidant, who typically their childhood is characterized by having too much attention and love, and very often it's a bit controlling, right? So I see this actually a lot with Southern European parents. Like if you come from a very religious background, or your parents are, really kind of helicopter parents and they love you, they tell you that they love you, but they don't really give you any space and they don't really give you any kind of individual identity. They tell you what to do, what hobbies you should do. And so you grow up quite naturally fearing intimacy, because for you, intimacy's never really been safe. Intimacy's been associated with, I'm going to lose my identity, I'm going to be smothered, I'm going to be trapped. And actually, it's a sign that there's something wrong with me and maybe I'm just not good enough, because why are they telling me what to do all the time? Why are they controlling me, right? And so as a dismissive avoidant, you grow up and lo and behold, as an adult, you need more space. You're a little bit more independent, right? You kind of want that peacefulness and you prefer your own company. Doesn't mean that you don't enjoy love. It just means that you need a bit more space. And then lastly, you have the fearful avoidant or the disorganized attachment, depending on whichever terminology you want. And fearful avoidance I had a little bit of this myself. I work with a lot of fearful avoidance, which is kind of interesting. Fearful avoidance are when your parents are a little bit volatile. And so sometimes they might be really loving and really present. Other times they might just be completely absent. They might be really kind to you one day and then actually come home from school and they're like screaming and they're angry and they're very unpredictable, right? And so when you have this kind of very chaotic parent, this very hot and cold dynamic, as a child, you grow up essentially feeling like, I can't trust anyone. I can't trust this situation. I have to be ultra vigilant and I have to just kind of scan the room and be ready to respond accordingly. So you actually end up being very malleable. And how that translates later in life is that on the one hand, you really, really want intimacy and love, and you're constantly seeking, you have the kind of anxiousness. You really want it. But as soon as you get it, you're like, holy cow, this is not safe. I'm out.
Pull it
right.
out.
And it's exactly, it's this kind of like very hot, cold dynamic. You see a lot of this in Hollywood. And if we think about it from a kind of characteristic, it's like love bombing, right? It's like, coming on really strong. And then as soon as you've got the catch and you're in the relationship, it's like, poof, I'm out. And that's actually not trying to be malicious. That's just genuinely fearing intimacy. And so they're the attachment styles. And for your final question, how I realized that I had the anxious attachment was, I think I was pretty secure for most of my life. Honestly, I look back at my previous relationships and they were pretty secure, pretty stable. However, my father left the family when I was 23. And so that was, at the time, the biggest trauma I'd experienced. He was very absent for a lot of my life. And yes, there was kind of the undercurrent of that anxious attachment there. But generally, I had pretty secure relationships. And it's only when my dad really left at 23, I have a good relationship with him now, but he officially left the family, that the biggest trauma, that kind of big abandonment really happened. And at 23, I actually became very anxiously attached. So this is kind of to say that this stuff doesn't happen just in childhood. It can actually happen later in life. And the relationships that I had after that, especially with my kind of first fiance, my first engagement, was characterized by me being so chronically anxious and thinking to myself that this anxiety is kind of normal, right? Because I think there is actually a big culture out there of, oh, you're a, hardworking high achiever, you're a type A. Of course you're anxious. We're all anxious. Everyone's got anxiety, right? So I kind of normalized it. But I was really anxious. I was anxious like every single day. I'd be waiting for a text back and I'd be anxious. And we'd go on a date. The date would be lovely. Being in his company was wonderful. But then I'd be anxious after. And this carried on through even to when we were actually engaged. And I never felt fully safe. I never felt very kind of seen or heard or understood. And it was only when I began to understand that he was actually an avoidant and that we had this push-pull dynamic, right? And then I began to, go on YouTube and started educating myself that I was like, oh, holy cow, I have anxious attachment. This is partly why we are such a dysfunctional couple. And that's really when I was like, okay, I've done all this personal growth. I know how to meditate. I've done retreats. I've done all this personal, wonderful stuff. Clearly, I've not looked at this though, right? Clearly, I've not looked at my attachment style, because why would I? I'd never been engaged. I never had the reason to really look at it. And that's when I started going deep into this work and realized the whole relationship psychology space is a whole different kettle of fish, which we very rarely look at. You only really look at it when you're in relationship crisis. And even then, you might not go very deep, right? So it was a whole new world opened up to me. And I was really working in behavioral science at the time. And I was so fascinated by it. And I just made it my mission to become secure. I didn't want to feel that way. It was horrible. So much time wasted. Yeah.
I love it. There's so much to unpack there, because there's some questions that I wanted to ask too, because after I read that book and then I followed a podcaster who talks about that, and it seems like that your self-awareness is there as well, and your upbringing, you're aware of it. But one thing I didn't realize is that I don't want to, because I have with my growing up story is just similar to yours. I've got the anxious attachment style. And then I realized sometimes I have the avoidant as well, because like for me, I think reading that book, I don't want to be too caught up in it because of the identity part. I don't want to make sure that I stick with that identity part, because like now that you know that your attachment style was anxious, now you're trying to work hard towards a secure style. That's what I want to do too, and a lot of people would love to do that as well. But when you're aware of it, when I listen to songs, for example, in the car, and I listen to the lyrics, I already go, oh, he's got an anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style. That's the way like I think of it now, because now that I know about it too. But is there a science? Let's talk about the science of it. What's one surprising scientific insight about relationships that most people misunderstand? Because some people might not be aware of this too, but can we change as well? And can we have multiple identities? Because some parts of us, we're human. We have different emotions, you know, so from anxious to avoidant. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's quite interesting because you can be very different in different relationships, right? Like I can be, for example, I'm very secure. I've always been very secure in my friendships. But then when it came to romantic relations, I was really anxious, right? And I've noticed, actually, it's even interesting now, like I'm very secure in my marriage. I'm super secure. But I've noticed that with prospective clients, like anxiety comes up, right? Especially when I'm like close to, a big client or a big deal and I'm like waiting for payment to come through. Like, oh, the anxiety comes up there. I'm like, okay, there's still stuff to work through here. Which again, we're human. It's like an onion. You're constantly peeling stuff away. And actually, I will say a lot of my clients or entrepreneurs that I work with, we start out by working on romantic relationships. I help them fix their marriage or find love. And then they come back to me like, can you actually help me with my money blocks? Can you actually help me with my business? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've been there. I've done this, right? It's the same stuff, just from a different lens, from a different angle. And ultimately, you want to be securely attached in every arena of your life. And that is a bigger journey. That's a longer journey, right? But you can do the romantic stuff first, get to that baseline, feel secure, have that wonderful, nourishing relationship, and then from there tackle the other areas of your life. The biggest kind of scientific fact that I think that really landed for me was I spent a lot of time in couples counseling with my ex-fiance. Yeah, with my ex-fiance. My husband and I did a little bit of it, kind of at the very beginning, just preventative. And it is expensive, like it's pricey, right? You're typically paying anything from $300 to $500 a session. And after, I think we did 9 months of couples counseling with my ex-fiance, we didn't get very far. And I can see that consistently with my clients, that they come to me after maybe a year of it. They spend about 10K. They haven't got very far. And that's when it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because you would think, well, if my relationship isn't working out, if we're having difficulties, we should go to the counselor, we should talk about them, lie on that little therapist couch like Freud, and chat about it. And that'll fix everything. They'll diagnose me. But they don't. And actually, so much of counseling and therapy is really just talking, right? Talking, building awareness, processing. There's a thing called the COM-B model in behavioral change. And really that's broken down into 3 pillars. How do you actually drive behavioral change? First, you need to build the motivation. So you build awareness of the problem. Then you build the capability. How do you solve the problem? And then you look at opportunities to reinforce that learning and actually make it manifest. And so when we think about therapy and counseling, you're really only just building the motivation. You're kind of just talking about and you're building problem awareness. Very rarely are you actually getting tangible strategies. And if you do get strategies, like learning how to communicate, learning how to do a conflict, learning how to calm your anxiety. The strategies you're learning are only rooted in your conscious mind. I've never seen a therapist or a counselor work with a subconscious mind. They will have awareness of it. They'll know about it. Of course they do, right? It's psychology. But when it comes to giving pragmatic, tangible tools and techniques, it doesn't really go there. And that means that you can spend forever learning different tools, different techniques, talking about the problem, building awareness, knowing your story inside out. Everyone knows their story, right? The story of their childhood and what mum and dad did and why they are the way they are and blah, 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 and their abandonment wound. Everyone knows this stuff. But how do you actually freaking solve it? How do you actually get rid of it? And I spent 15 years talking about the problem. I had such good literacy. I could pinpoint memories of, well, then dad left the house at this point when I was 2. I knew all this stuff, but I didn't actually fix it. And it was only when I started really pulling together everything that I knew from my NLP training, which I actually did when I was 17, about the subconscious mind, the hypnotherapy, the Joe Dispenza work that I'd been doing, the integrated attachment theory, when I kind of pulled all of that together, and I did train with a really wonderful teacher in the space, that I actually began to understand that, if I just go to the subconscious mind and learn to recondition, not to rewire, you can't actually rewire your brain, that's a fallacy, right? But like actually recondition and create new neural pathways, I can become securely attached really quickly. And so that's really what I started putting my energy into. And I'm not even joking. I left my ex-fiance in, I think it was like August of a certain year. Within 10 months, 11 months, I'd met my husband and we got married very quickly. It was just like, it was a done deal. We just knew. We literally just knew. And I was so secure by that point. I was so safe, comfortable, full of self-love, radiating joy. I was in a really, really good place and have been ever since. I will say in those 10 to 11 months, I wasn't just doing the work. I had my 4 months of rebounding. I was definitely drinking and partying and rebounding. So we can actually condense that down to probably 6 months. But the point is that you can actually transform this really quickly. And so that's the biggest kind of secret in this work. And I have my own conspiracy theories on why it's a secret, like why it's not talked about more.
Why is that?
I just think a lot of folks would go out of business. Truly. Like I actually think, I see it with myself too, though. Like I don't have clients for years on end. Like they work with me for 3 to 6 months and they're like, hey, bye, I feel great now. And I'm like, yeah, good. Off you go.
That's good.
My revenue model's a little bit screwed because I'm like, but like, I'd rather that, right? And have ethics behind me than, kind of artificial.
Pay you all these years. Oh, that's crazy.
And create this culture of dependency, right? Like there is a culture of dependency. This kind of idea that your therapist is on speed dial. And my therapist was on speed dial again for 15 years. And don't get me wrong, I'm not poo-pooing, like phenomenal work. It's so valuable to build that awareness. It's so valuable to get literacy in this stuff. But it doesn't necessarily, it's not the silver bullet. There are faster ways, right? They're not as sexy and indulgent. Like you don't need to talk about the story to do the subconscious mind work. Actually, I don't need to know any of my clients' stories, to be honest. All I need to know is what's happening for you, identify the core wounds, shift them. It can be really fast.
Wow. So just say for the mindset shift, like what's a simple mindset shift that can instantly improve our relationships? And is there multiple steps that we need to take? Because I love the fact that you're mixing the education that you've learned, but also mixing it in with the subconscious and Dr. Joe Dispenza. I'm fascinated by that too, because the power of the subconscious mind is so powerful, but you're mixing that in with your academia. So tell us, is there a simple mindset shift that we can use to help improve our relationships? Or is there multiple steps in our subconscious that we need to dive through, knowing that you've got a whole powerful, like all this education knowledge that you've had to experience for those 15 years, and then you've blended it in with the subconscious. It's just so powerful. But yeah, what's a simple mindset shift or steps and strategies in terms of the subconscious that we can improve our relationships more faster?
Yeah, really, really good question. And the truth is, to do the subconscious kind of reconditioning practice, it's not something I can just kind of share now and be like, off you go, transform your life in a minute. That would be incredible. I'd probably be a multi-gazillionaire if I could do that, but that's not how it works, right? But I can give you 2 tangible things that you can get started with. And one of them is actually just a conscious mind shift. It's nothing to do with subconscious, but it's just a kind of a reframe. There's a few reframes here that I found really, really powerful. One is, so much of our attention is spent on pointing the finger of blame at our partner and being like, well, they don't do this and they don't do that. If only he would do this. And oh my God, he did this. And, wouldn't it be amazing if they changed this? You can't change your partner. You can't change your partner, right? Nagging them to change is not going to work either. The only thing that you can really do is actually change yourself and inspire them to step up. Because when you become securely attached, they're either going to get left behind and you're going to walk away from them because you'll realize that you're worthy of more, or they're going to step up, right? Because they feel safe to do that work with you. So I always find that doing the solo work is the most powerful thing. And so what would happen if you just assumed that actually you have 100% responsibility and 100% power to transform that relationship? What would you do then? What would you do differently, right? You'd probably stop complaining about them and you'd probably start looking for solutions. So that's one really powerful reframe. And then another little kind of, again, conscious reframe, this is nothing complex, but it was so transformative when I heard it, is most of the time when we are upset with our partners, when we are feeling disconnected in that relationship, it's because, very natural human biology, our brains are constantly scanning for the threat, for the negative, right? And so if you imagine that your relationship is kind of like blank white canvas, and actually the white symbolizes everything that's good in the relationship, and actually the connection, the commitment, all the love that you have and the foundations that you build, what you find yourself looking at is the tiny little specks of dirt, of ink, whatever, that are on the canvas, right? You're fixating on the negative, which again makes sense. And that's going to be part of your conditioning. That's going to be the insecure attachment, like fixating and obsessing and making it bigger and like, trying to rub it out, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Actually, though, there's a ton of white space to be thankful for, right? And you can just do that consciously. You can literally just think about that consciously, like what are the good things in the relationship and are they worth sticking around for? They probably are. When we think about the subconscious, one quick little thing that you can start to do, and again, this is another really simple one, is next time you're triggered, next time you feel upset with your partner, ask yourself, what meaning am I giving this situation? What is the story about the situation in my head? What meaning am I giving it? Let yourself kind of play out the story and then drill down into what meaning am I giving that about myself? And essentially you're drilling down to identify what is the statement about you, what is the belief about you that's actually contributing to the pain. And so an example of that might be, I'll try and think of a personal example here. Let's say my husband would, or not my husband, let's say a partner would come home, find the sponge in the sink, that's always been a pet peeve, find the sponge in the sink and be like, hey, can you not put the sponge in the sink? It's actually like really annoying for me. I really don't like having the sponge in the sink, right? I might get really triggered by that because I might actually feel really criticized by that. I might be like, well, for crying out loud, he's doing a ton of other things, like the sponge in the sink. Are you serious? Like you leave your socks all over the place and you never cook dinner and there's a whole lot of other stuff. But if I actually stop and look at, okay, well, what meaning am I giving him telling me to not put the sponge in the sink? What meaning am I giving there? Well, he's criticizing me. Okay, well, what meaning am I giving the fact that he's criticizing me? It means that I'm bad. It means that I'm a bad person. There you go. That is a belief that you have around yourself. That's part of your conditioning. That is directly linked to your insecure attachment style. What would happen if you didn't feel bad about yourself and actually you felt that you were good and you're a good enough person and you are perfect as you are? Someone telling you that you have the sponge in the sink, you'd probably be like, okay, I won't do that next time. It wouldn't be so triggering because there'd be nothing at the heart of you that's upsetting, right? So with every time you get triggered, there's going to be a core belief inside of you that's getting aggravated, right? Michael Singer would say it's kind of like you're a rose and you have a thorn and you kind of keep scratching on that thorn. Much better just to get rid of the thorn, just like snap it off. That's when you do the subconscious mind work and you go deep to clear it out. Is that helpful? I feel like that was
super. Yeah, it's super powerful because I myself personally know about certain triggers that I have in my relationship, and I'm sure everybody does too. And I've seen it. And just say for a friend of mine, she used to get triggered, and I see there's so much at play here as well because you mentioned the ambition part. I think also the feminine energy plus the masculine energy plays something in there as well. But I want to know, like, when there's one person, like to say the female is more ambitious, and I've seen relationships that have just gone downhill because of this, but what happens when one person is way more high achiever, but and the other person isn't on that same level? What are your thoughts on that? Is there a belief that holding the other person back, or is it masculine, feminine energy coming into play, because especially for women as well, when women are more driven and to achieve more, like I've seen the husbands not feel like they're needed and whatnot too. And men like to take care of their family, for example, and sometimes that just creates a bit of a conflict with their relationship too. Have you seen that? And what are your thoughts and advice for relationships where one person is more driven, trying to grow, but the other one is still behind? And kind of like you said, left behind, either that person is inspired to come up, or this person moves on, the high achiever moves on. What are your thoughts? Have you seen that with your coaching clients as well?
Yeah, I have, absolutely. And it can happen in different ways, right? What I see, partly from an ambition point of view, but what I often see happening is that when one person is doing the inner work and they become securely attached, because they will after doing this work, and the other partner doesn't step up to do that work, when you're secure, you start to see the behavior in a way that's very clear to you, right? You start to kind of see the maladaptive responses. You start to see the unproductive patterns. And when they're not getting rectified and you don't see any desire to change, well, your boundaries going to kick in. You're like, well, I can do better than this, and I'm probably going to exit. Completely fair. I did that. Some clients have done that. When we think about specifically ambition, it's more nuanced and complex than just, ambitious female means that the relationship's going to tank. Like, that's a very outdated viewpoint, right? What I find is that when we think about ambition, to kind of keep it really simple, there's kind of two drivers behind that ambition, right? You either have the really wounded drive, which is coming from that insecure attachment, which is coming from that kind of need to prove yourself. When you have a belief that you're not good enough, it's going to come from a need to prove that you are good enough, prove that you are worthy, prove that you are good. And so that drive to succeed, to achieve, to build wealth is really coming from a wounded energy. And that's really common, right? This is literally why I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and high achievers, because I'm like, well, no, I get it. That used to be me. Absolutely. And so it's coming from this kind of lacking energy where it's never going to be enough, if that makes sense. Right. And that's coming from the space of feeling depleted. And quite often you can enjoy the work, but it's not to say that it's actually what you authentically need. The flip side is when you have an ambition that's coming from a place of, I have found a purpose, my purpose. I have identified my needs. I know exactly where I want to go in my life. And actually fulfilling this purpose and getting my needs met through this activity is the most nourishing thing that I can do for myself, right? Typically, it's going to be an act of service in some shape or form. And so I feel very called, I feel very driven, I feel very motivated. And the ambition, kind of working those 12-hour days isn't a drain. It's kind of like, for me, the way I've experienced it is in corporate, working a 12-hour day was like, oh my goodness, I was drained, I was resentful, I felt like I'd had life sucked out of me. And there are still certain activities where I'm like, oh, like this is not getting my needs met, right? But then when you're in flow and your needs are getting met and actually you're connected to that sense of purpose, 12 hours can fly by. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing at all. It's why the Japanese never retire, right? Like, it's not a bad thing. And so I think we kind of misunderstand a lot of ambition, because a lot of ambition is actually really unhealthy. What's more important and what's a more productive conversation maybe is looking at, okay, well, is the ambition that you have, is the drive that you have, that kind of success that you're chasing, is it coming from a healthy place? Is it coming from a loving place? Is it coming from a grounded place? Or is it coming from a wounded place? And you don't have to give it up. It doesn't mean that when you do the healing, you become penniless hippie. That's not actually what happens. You actually probably go on to make much more money and have much more abundance and freedom than ever before, because you're in that flow state, because you've connected to your purpose, your needs, and you're allowing that channel of love and abundance and everything to come through, right? So that's kind of the better question. And when it comes to the gender dynamics piece, I always say, like, does it not make sense if you're a woman to be operating from a place of freedom and flow and energy and getting your needs met, rather than being constricted and repressed and trapped and stuck, right? Some of the healthiest relationships that I have seen are where the woman is fully in her power and in her flow. And actually she's magnetizing and creating a lot of wealth and money with it. Doesn't mean that you can't be a mother. It's just about making sure that the needs are getting optimized and met. And in my brain, I always, when I coach couples on this, who are both really high achieving, it's like a puzzle. You've got the calendar, you've got the different commitments that you have, the different workloads, and it's kind of shuffling things around to make sure that your needs are getting met almost all the time, right? That is a partnership that you have to do with your partner. It can be done, though. It can be done. Does that make
I
sense?
love it. Yeah, that was very powerful too, because that ambition part as well. You said entrepreneurs do it and they spend a lot of their time avoiding and just driven because of the wounds
Yeah.
as well. I thought of it in a way is that because I have grown up in a chaotic life, like upbringing. And so I think that attributes to my drive as well. But I channel my pain. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs might do this, channel the pain and avoiding conflict with relationships or not solving things and just fueling that energy into your work and your drive and ambition. And like you said, I didn't realize it's not coming from a healthy place.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
that's
Mm-hmm.
something that I've never heard before and unpacked.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. Now, you mentioned when two people have ambitions and both driven, both ambitious, how do you help people balance that ambition and career goals with but also finding that time to have a fulfilling relationship? Do you recommend always having quality time with your partner set aside? Because I know that I hear other podcasters and a lot of them have the successful entrepreneurs that I listen to, they have set times, healthy relationships with their wife and find that time to make
Yeah.
sure that they have date nights with their partner and spend quality time. So what is your
Mm-hmm.
advice for two
Mm.
couples that are very driven and have busy lifestyles and they're working, but they need to have that balance, like you said? Any advice to have that balance to grow a great ambition, a great
Yeah.
career, but also have a fulfilling relationship?
Yeah. It's a really good question. And it's going to be unique to every couple, right? It really boils down to knowing what your needs are. And it's tricky to know what your needs are because most folks actually are very disconnected from their needs because they have a lot of subconscious blocks around getting their needs met, right? So I see that a lot of people with fearful avoidant attachment style, for example, will often feel that they are unworthy of having their needs met. And because in childhood, they were never getting their needs met. And so they actually don't even know what they are. And until you've actually cleared those blocks, those subconscious blocks, you can't really find out what your needs are. So there's a reason in my program, in my methodology, I always start with the phase one, which is the liberate phase of clear the blocks first. And then you get to the reconnect phase two, which is all about, okay, let's reconnect with your needs, reconnect with your partner, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of one thing I wanted to caveat there. But let's assume that you know what your needs are and you've cleared the blocks and you have clarity on those. It really is like a puzzle. It boils down to looking at, okay, again, I do this with clients of okay, well, let's think. So you have your career, and let's assume that the career, you love your career, you love your job. How many hours do you want to work a day? Like, what actually fills your tank? It's funny, there's kind of this myth where if you're an entrepreneur, you work 2 hours a day. I'm like, I don't want to work 2 hours a day. Or you don't want to coach. I'm like, no. I love my coaching. I love my clients. I love the work. I want to do more of this. Now, 8 hours, probably 60 hours is my cap. I don't necessarily want to do more than that. But I might be in flow some days and, fire out 13 hours and it flies by and I'm so happy and energized and euphoric at the end of it. And so it's this conversation of, well, how many hours actually fills your tank and when does it start to get depleting? How many hours do you need to get there? And what does that time together even look like, right? What are your needs in that time together? Is your need to veg out on the couch and just cuddle up and watch Love is Blind, which is probably what my husband and I are going to do later? Or is it actually to go out and glam up and dress up and feel really special and go and have adventures, discovering new restaurants? It all really boils down to identifying the needs that you have, having a dialogue around them, and then literally plugging in your, it's when I find it's this is kind of where my little analytical brain has a field day, because it's looking at your calendar, looking at your week and seeing, well, what is the optimal amount of time together? What is the optimal amount of time of having meals? You don't have to eat every meal together every day, right? That's kind of weird and unreasonable. How many breakfasts do you want to have together? How many workouts do you want to have together? What do you want your work day to even look like? What kind of vacations do you have? And mapping out this ideal scenario where ideally your needs are both getting met. And yes, there will be compromise, of course. Of course, you're not necessarily going to get everything every single week. The final thing I'll say is that I had one couple who was so ambitious and they were both founders and they'd been married for a long time. There was a lot of kind of disconnect already had been brewing. And this is so analytical and kind of simple, but at the same time, it was so powerful. What we did was we mapped out this ideal calendar And then both of them went off and created a separate list of their needs, of what their needs are and how to get them met. Kind of very prescriptive instructions, right? So like my husband knows that if I'm in a bad mood, then flowers actually go a long way. They're not expensive and they transform so much, right? Or like having a bath is better than having a shower. So clarifying very clearly what are the different needs that you have, what are the different ways that you can get them met, and then which are the ones that you can actually realistically get met on a week-to-week basis. And with this couple specifically, at the end of every week, every Sunday night, they would have a little 30-minute get together where they would just look at their needs and like tick them off, literally be like, okay, well, where did we do well this week? Where did we get things met? Where did we not? And then how do we want to change next week? It sounds a bit analytical, but my guess is if you're a busy, ambitious entrepreneur, your brain probably thinks that way anyway, right? And why wouldn't you do that with your relationship? Why would you do that with your finances, with your health, with your diet, with your business, but not with your relationship, right? Which Harvard repeatedly shows is the biggest indicator of your happiness.
There was a quote by, I think it was Warren Buffett, about the relationships, that's the most important decision. That's not the exact quote, but it's like the relationships is how it decides your success in life, is your relationships too. I want to talk about communication and conflict resolution, because sometimes some people avoid that conflict, and I know somebody that doesn't, and sometimes we do it our relationship too, but I see people that don't want to talk about things because they don't want to have that conflict and they don't want to communicate. For me, sometimes I don't like to speak out, so I just text it, and that's not a great way to do it. If I'm angry, for example, and I avoid that fight, and a lot of people do that as well, and some people just hold it back and just let it just brew and brew and brew and push it down. So we know that communication is super crucial in relationships, but what's one technique that you can teach that can help people improve how couples interact and how they communicate? There's sayings that, never go to bed angry. That helps relationships as well.
Sometimes. Yeah, not always. Not always.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I think they're not going to bed angry. It's like a really lovely bit of a pop culture myth. Like it's a nice thing in principle. Sometimes if you have a really busy day the next day and you need your sleep, go to sleep if you can, right? Obviously, if you're going to lie there stewing and crying and feeling terrible, then you want to resolve that as best as you can. It's kind of unreasonable, though, to think that with every conflict, which often will start in the evening when you're tired, right? When you're tired and your guard is down and you're feeling more vulnerable, that is typically when triggers will flare up and you will get into more of a conflict. It's kind of unreasonable to think that you have to resolve everything. You can't. So can you agree upon to what extent do you get it resolved to? Is it that, like my husband and I, 9.9 times out of 10, we might not resolve a conflict, but we will always, kiss goodnight and say, I love you. Even if I'm sitting there being like, frothing at the mouth of rage, but like it's still something that we can commit to doing. And then in the morning, you've got a clear head and you can actually tend to it. So I was going to work with that. But I think the most helpful hack is, can you just focus on owning your experience? It's kind of back to that idea of like, imagine you have 100% responsibility and 100% power in this relationship. And in your experience of that relationship, which is going to be very different to your partner's experience, can you just own yours? And what that looks like is, rather than coming in being like, oh, you don't care about me because you are late to this drinks thing and you clearly don't care and you're always late. That's very accusatory. It's not going to help the situation, right? Your partner is probably going to feel very criticized. They're probably going to feel very attacked. They're probably going to get very defensive. Then they're going to get angry. Then they're going to throw something back at you. And then lo and behold, you're back in a conflict, right? What's much more productive is going to be to talk about your experience, which is along the lines of, and again, it might sound really clunky. I kind of tell all my clients, like, you might feel like a bit of a robot at the outset. That's not a bad thing. And yeah, saying something like, hey, so I'd like to share something with you, get the consent. And if they say, sure, share away, honey, you can then share. I'm actually really hurt and upset, speak to your feeling, when I experienced lateness. I experienced like you showing up late, right? And my experience of that was like, yeah, I'm sitting there and I'm at this bar and I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm waiting and I'm wondering, like, where are you? And I'm starting to panic and I wonder if something has happened to you. And then I'm checking my phone and I'm feeling kind of embarrassed because people are looking at me and I kind of feel like I've been stood up a little bit. And I'm starting to wonder, like, does he care? Does he actually want to be here? like I'm really hurt by that. And that's something that I actually really struggle with in our dynamic. Is that something that you can help me with? Right? That's way nicer and way more powerful than saying like, you are late and you don't care and you don't care about me and you're always late, and like accusation, accusation, accusation. Right? It takes a lot of, I guess, kind of practice to learn to keep reining into yourself. But when you do that, like you kind of stop conflict in its tracks. It's very, very, very powerful. So yeah, that's probably the best tip that I would share.
Gosh, there's so much nuggets of wisdom here, so much value, guys. If you're finding this like really insightful, please do me a favor, hit that follow button. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe. Let me know what was the key takeaway as well, because I'm finding this super fascinating. I've got so much more that we could talk about. We definitely, I think, have to do a part 2, because relationships and success go hand in hand as well. Because I definitely want to talk about, this is probably another topic, but relationship killers and what you've seen in your experience of what kills a relationship. A lot of it's unpacking your internal beliefs now, which is, I'm finding, really helpful. And you mentioned clearing blocks as well, because I think a lot of us might have those blocks from our childhood as well. So you've overcome your childhood wounds and become more secure. So what other things that we can do to clear those blocks? If we know that things are triggering us, about like our partners doing certain things that are triggering us, looking within is one thing as well, and questioning. But is there any steps or methods that you do, like meditation wise? Because I'm into this, the scientific and quantum physics as well. I love learning about that too. It seems like you're applying it with, the practical steps as well, with the conscious. But is there things that we can do, steps that we can take in terms of clearing blocks that we are aware of? I do sound healing. I love that, because that clears the cheese and whatnot too. But there's so many different modalities, breath work and whatnot. But do you have any advice for clearing some blocks that are holding us back from our success, from our relationships, even money blocks as well? I love the fact that, you work on the relationships and then afterwards you can also clear blocks with money blocks. That's awesome. But what are the advice that you have for the clearing the blocks?
Work with me, ultimately. I mean that truly, because what you just said there, the breath work, the sound healing, I tried everything to the point that, I tried like Hakomi therapy, I'm a trained EFT practitioner, I'm a trained IFS practitioner as well, but MBSR, mindfulness-based, I'm a meditation teacher. Like I tried every freaking thing. And in the end, the most effective tools I teach my clients. Every client's going to be a little bit different, but I have a kind of ballpark 15-minute brain reconditioning practice that I teach. And it kind of involves hacking the subconscious mind. And so really that's part of my methodology. And I can see myself actually in the future making this kind of practice the proprietary model, because it took me so much time and practice to really figure out what actually works. Like we know that affirmations don't work on their own. Mirror work doesn't work on it. Like this stuff doesn't work in isolation. There is a method. There is kind of like a secret sauce, I guess, of hacking it all together in a way, in a system where the impact compounds on the prior impact, right? Like the results kind of grow. I will say that kind of a lot of the breathwork stuff, a lot of the different modalities, they're good tools and they can be helpful, but they're supplements. They're supplements. They're not going to make you securely attached. The only thing that's going to make you securely attached is by reconditioning your subconscious mind. And the stuff might feel nice. It's good for your nervous system. This is true, right? It's absolutely good for soothing and self-soothing and giving you different tools and techniques. But the actual kind of meat and bones of doing this work is really working with the subconscious mind. And like I said, if you have the right process around it, it can be very quick. And just finding that process took me like freaking 15 years. It took me a long time, a lot of trial and error, and a lot of money.
Yeah.
A lot of money. But it's really powerful stuff. And I love this work. I love this work.
Do you have any books that have massively helped you in your journey, and all those 15 years that you've learned? What are the books that have made such a huge impact, or people, mentors that have helped you on your journey?
Well, there's been a lot. And I'm really lucky. Something I didn't mention, my father, he's also a coach. And he wasn't always a coach though. And I think about 10, 15 years ago, he started partnering with people like Joe Dispenza. And so he had access to a lot of this material and he would just give it to me, right? He was just like feeding it all to me, which was fantastic. I mean, I resisted at the beginning, especially when I was kind of right at the very beginning, like Tony Robbins stuff. I was like, oh, go away. I don't want to read this. But I was digesting a lot of it. And I think that, learning NLP was really powerful. It's kind of a shame that NLP's been a little bit butchered, I think, in more recent years. But the one book that really stands out for me that changed everything for me, it was actually kind of my big, like, oh my God, what am I doing in my life? It's called The Way of Integrity by Martha Beck. And I actually looked at working with her. I decided not to work with her because I think the book and the theory is fantastic. I wasn't so sure about the actual kind of methods and stuff that she worked with. But the book called The Way of Integrity, it woke me up. That's kind of the best way I can say it. And I don't want to give any spoilers. It kind of builds on the premise that most of us, because of society's conditioning, we're all kind of living a lie. We're all hiding our authentic selves. We're all kind of bending ourselves out of shape and people pleasing to fit in, right? And so what's kind of funny, and I guess kind of the final anecdote I'll leave you with, and when I was reading that book, I was engaged to my ex-fiance. I was lying in bed and I was just kind of every night I'd like read a little chapter, and it would traumatize me a little bit because I would uncover things that I'd lie in bed, blinking into the night, being like, what am I doing with my life? Like, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? Like, what am I doing? The book really forced me to look at where am I lying to myself? And it's so funny because my biggest fear when I read that book, my biggest fear was like, if I'm really radically honest with myself, if I actually open up my heart, be honest, and do what is truly in my heart and, become secure and all of the stuff and actually follow my instinct, my gut and my passion, my heart. And like, she talks about how in the book, most people think they're going to just run around the street naked and quit their job and, and like go completely bananas and like really set themselves free. For me, my biggest fear was like, I think I'm going to leave Vancouver. I was living in Vancouver at the time in Canada. I was like, I think I'm going to quit my job. I think I'm going to leave Vancouver. I think I'm going to move to Ibiza. I think I'm going to try to DJ. I think I'm going to marry a DJ. And I'm just going to live by the beach in Ibiza, drinking and partying. That was my biggest fear because I was like, oh my God, if I do that, my life is just I'm going to be an exile from society, right? Like everyone's going to. The craziest thing is, for like a year later, whatever it was, or maybe a year and a half later, I met my now husband, who's a DJ, and we moved to Ibiza and we bought a home in Ibiza.
Oh my God.
I did try to learn DJing and I kind of gave it up very quickly, but I did start building a business. And yeah, right now, like I'm an Ibiza resident. I have a property in Ibiza. I'm technically a Spanish resident. And it's like my worst kind of fears of what would happen to me came true. And yet at the time when this all kind of started, I was already securely attached. I already had my vision for my business. Our relationship, our marriage is incredible. I am making more money than I could have dreamed of in corporate. And that's not going to be bragging and being horrible. It's like just a fact because I'm in flow. And I got to live in Ibiza. Like, how freaking cool is that? At the time, though, it was horrifying and terrifying, right? Because I just imagined myself being this kind of emaciated, like just, I don't know, party girl. But instead I was like, no, I was actually at my healthiest. And so the Way of Integrity, had I known that back then when I was reading that book, I think I would have really freaked out. But it just opened my eyes that actually when you are deeply authentic to yourself, that's where the magic really happens. That's where you find the flow. Life works in very mysterious ways.
I love it. Closing off now, what's one key message about love and success that you'd love to leave our audience with?
Yeah. Love and success are compatible. They're not mutually exclusive. There's a reason my methodology is called the Successfully in Love method. And everyone, you deserve to have true love and a livable life. And you can have both. You absolutely can have both. In fact, I would go so far as to argue that when you have the love, that's when you have the success, right? When you are full of love, securely attached, feeling grounded, stable, confident, and happy, that's when the real wealth and the real flow happens. And you can have both.
I love it. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I thank you so much for your time. If anyone wants to find you, where can they find you and follow you and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 real places. KatarinaPolonska.com. That's my website, KatarinaPolonska. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn with my corporate peers over there. I'm just Katarina Polonska on LinkedIn. If you type in science-backed relationship or love and relationship coach, you'll find me there. I do also have Instagram, though I'm not on there too often. That's at Katarina Polonska.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you.